Hello and welcome to another Top Advisor Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Halloran. We have a repeat guest here with a new book coming out. Now, if you don't know Dr. Crosby, I don't know where you've been living because he speaks everywhere all the time at all of the conferences, at least that I go to, and then probably about 900 that I don't. And he's got a new book coming out called The Soul of Wealth. Now, this is not his first book. He's published many books before this, but this book is fundamentally different. Not only, in my opinion, is it just the whole feeling of everything is different. The way that it's been organized fundamentally makes it easier to consume and easier to implement. So is that a fair statement, Doc?
Yeah, man, it's a statement that brings me great joy. I was very thoughtful. I got about 80 pages into writing this book in a more traditional format. So, my two previous books have been 250 pages, 20 chapters, or excuse me, 12 chapters, 20 pages a piece. And I wrote about 4 chapters in The Soul of Wealth with that same format, and it sucked. Like, I just crumbled it up and started over because I knew it needed something else, and I wanted to think critically and sort of re-examine the way that we write and the way that we consume. And at the same time, I read a book by Rick Rubin, who could be your twin, candidly.
I read the book. I know what book you're talking about.
Yeah. And Rick Rubin's book was a huge inspiration for me, The Creative Act.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I have a big job. I have a wife and 3 kids. I try and read every day, but at the end of the day, I get to my chair and I'm ready to read. And let's be honest, a lot of falling asleep happens.
Yeah.
And I really love Rick Rubin's just quick hitters. And I tried to do the same thing. 50 essays, quickly distilled, hit you between the eyes, give you something to think about and meditate on through the week. So it means the world to me that you enjoyed it.
Achieved, brother. And that's what's so interesting about this. And we had talked about this previously, but when I had gotten a copy of the book, I had just finished The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. And there was just this wonderful continuation of the feeling. And so I would just put full disclosure for everybody listening. I was preparing for the show today because I knew we were going to talk about the book. And after I got a copy of the book, I finished it on the plane on the way home. And I was so excited to give this to my kids because they really, really need some connection, right? Between what they're working for, how they're working, and then really how that should help them feel and how they should really look at their souls and how they're interacting with the money that they're making. Because my kids are finally at 21 are starting to actually make a little bit of money. And there's so many things in the book that we're gonna address, but I gave the book to my son. It's gone. Like I'm hoping he gave it to somebody else because I think that's what all books do. That's actually what I did with my copy of The Creative Act. I finished it and I immediately gave it to somebody. I'm like, okay, you really need to read this. So okay, part of what I think I want to do to level set our audience here is I want to talk about the why. Right. So why did you write that? I mean, we understand why you wrote it in the way that you wrote it, but was there like what was the antecedent to you saying, man, I got to do this way?
I have always been someone who thinks a lot about meaning and purpose in life. In college, I mean, you're a therapist. It's just 2 shrinks on here. So you'll be familiar with the process of sort of picking a theoretical orientation as a mental health practitioner and sort of choosing the school of thought that underpins the way you work with clients. And for me, the one that always resonated was Viktor Frankl's school of logotherapy, which is really sort of rooted in this idea that rather than being pushed by our past, the way a Freudian might say, like, you're sort of the combination of all the bad crap that's happened to you. Frankl would say we can be pulled by our future and we can be pulled by our goals and our meaning. And that was always a very empowering concept to me. So I've been a huge Frankl and Kierkegaard devotee for a very long time. I think way more than is healthy about meaning and purpose in my own life. But I hadn't figured out how to make it work for me professionally. So the 2 previous books that I had written were very candidly, very calculated. Like I knew where I wanted to get in my career. I needed to put certain messages out in the world to become, well known enough to get there. And those, I'm immensely proud of both of those books. I stand by what's in them, but I mean, they were less a passion project and more of a calculated career step. This is a passion project.
Yeah.
This is the stuff that I eat, sleep, and breathe. And I finally, I think I finally uh, had enough money in the bank and enough, I had enough money in the bank and enough of a reputation to say, hey, I'm gonna do this, even if it's, even if it's not gonna, help me up any sort of a corporate ladder.
Sure. Well, listen, dude, you're on the top of that mountain anyway, brother, which I just think is absolutely fantastic. And it's you and I have spent time when we've seen each other talking about this, but I was a big Fritz Perls philosophy, which was, much more coachy and a little bit more direct and forthright, which, by the way, didn't bode well for me being a therapist. But all right. So the soul of wealth, there's a couple of things here that I want to address so that everybody understands. um, One, there is an epidemic of people just feeling incredibly disconnected and lonely, right? And you talk about that. So do you mind if we start there?
No, it's the perfect place to start, and it's really a big reason why I wrote this book. Going back to Frankl, paraphrasing Frankl, he said, people today have the means to live, but no meaning to live for, and that's very true of our world. If you look back to when the U.S. was founded, 85% of the world was living in poverty under what would be $2 a day, inflation adjusted for today. I mean, absolutely backbreaking poverty for most people most of the time, 85% of the world. Today, that number is 9%, which is still 9% too high. I mean, that's still a lot of, that's still millions and millions of people. And we shouldn't give up on trying to eradicate poverty and hunger and things. But in 200 years, to have gone from 85% poverty to 9% poverty, we now create enough for everyone on Earth to eat 2,000 calories a day.
Mm.
I know, look, I mean, we had a high profile military attack, Iran on Israel just yesterday. I'm not saying that there's no conflict or no violence in the world, but the 20th century is one of the bloodiest periods in human history, and we've been doing much better lately. Domestic violence is way down throughout much of the developed world over the last couple hundred years. So we find ourselves at this time of like incredible human flourishing. We have enough to eat. We're safe. We're safe. We're peaceful. We're well fed. We're well compensated, and we're absolutely miserable because what has happened is we have moved up that hierarchy of needs. We've got for everyone listening to this podcast, we've got sort of our safety and shelter needs met. So now we start worrying about meaning, purpose, love, relationship, legacy. And what we know is that, Gen X and younger, most people say they are lonely. Most people. It's like 51% of Gen X. It's like nearly 3/4 of Gen Z. And the younger you are, the worse it gets. So we have this weird juxtaposition of enormous physical wealth and psychological and spiritual impoverishment. And that's really what the book is written to address. Like, is there anything that we can do to use the wealth to sort of bridge that gap, or get a better understanding of what true wealth might look like?
Well, so when it comes to advisors, right? Because I mean, this book has broad applicability to the world, not just our audience, right? But let's bring this back to advisors, because this is what behavioral finance, some of it's really about, right? And I love when you're talking in the book about what should be the desired outcome of the achievement of being wealthy or the ability to retire. Would you mind taking that and run with it?
Yeah, if you I think I know where you're going. You tell me if I'm wrong, but like if you think about how we prepare for retirement, a lot of times we over index on one piece of that. And this will be very familiar to you, but in the 90s and then through today, Martin Seligman and others have pioneered this field of positive psychology, which is less about how your parents screwed you up and more about more about what makes people great, what makes a great leader, what makes you happy, what makes people thrive and be joyful. And he found that there's really these five things. And when we're planning for retirement, we basically sort of over index on one. The one that we really over index on is what he calls positive experiences, which is basically leisure. So we go, hey, I want to live at the beach. You ask the average person, what do you want to do, what financially, what's your retirement goal? Like, retire to a cabin in the mountains or golf every day or whatever. Like, hey, like whatever, sure. That's one facet, but there's four others, and the four others, one is engagement, which is deep, meaningful work. Okay, so when your job is no more, like, where are you going to scratch that very human itch to do meaningful work? Relationships are another one. Meaning is the fourth one. Working for something bigger than yourself. Spirituality, religion, teamwork, charitable work, and then the final one is advancement. We don't want to stagnate. We want to be getting better. We want to be growing. We want to be learning. And yet, again, when you go back to how we prepare for retirement and the needs that are met in the workplace, almost every one of these, except for leisure, is met in the workplace. You're working with people, you're part of a team, you're getting better, you're learning, you're growing. And then when we retire, it's like, oh, okay, well, we hit our number, we go to the beach, and now we're only ticking one of five boxes in terms of sort of joyful, thrivent living. So we've really sort of hyper fixated on the leisure and the financial sufficiency parts of retirement, and a lot of people die. I mean, we see a
Yeah.
spike. We see a spike in deaths after retirement because 4/5 of people's happiness just falls away. So it's time for a new conversation about wealth and retirement readiness.
I think a lot of advisors want to get there, Doc. I mean, I think that's huge. I remember when I was working with Carson many moons ago, we created this thing based off of a book that he and Steve Sandusky wrote called Avalanche, which was about true wealth, right? What really does wealth mean? And I remember role playing and helping advisors learn these conversation techniques just to be able to ask the questions to initiate the conversation. And dude, that was in 2009, 2010, right? And now we're quite a while later, right? Time's ticking, brother. And I think there's more and more advisors who want to do this. So how do they begin? How do they start switching the conversations that they're having with their clients, which is going to, of course, make them more money, make them more referable, have deeper relationships, sticky relationships, all of the things that they want from the world of marketing? Because some people might be listening to this and saying, this is a freaking marketing podcast. I got there. It took me 14 minutes to get there, but I'm there. I'm going to ping you on this because, again, I think this is such a fundamental difference maker in not just the relationship, but the communication and what this sort of relationship that you're teaching in this book can do.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. So first of all, we have to have eyes to see it. And I want to prove this with a couple of data points. Accenture did a study a few years ago, and they asked people, what are you looking for from your relationship with your financial advisor? Number one thing is someone who understands me personally. Number two thing is someone who shares my values. And the number three thing was someone who I can hang with socially.
Oh.
And what is conspicuously absent is any mention of creating a financial plan or balancing a portfolio.
Yeah.
It's because that stuff is easy to vet. Like there is an assumption that if someone has, letters behind their name or experience or good reviews or, comes to you referred from a friend, that they can do the blocking and tackling of their job. The connection piece, though, is much harder to find. And so that's what people are looking for. Okay. So that's what clients are asking for, right? Now let's look at how do we help clients. Merrill Lynch did a meta-analysis in 2016 of all the ways that advisors add value to their clients' lives. And they looked at, everything, like every part of an advisor's value stack. And the good news for your listeners is that every piece of it was truly additive. Tax alpha, product selection, asset allocation, all of it, like all of it's additive, but it's not all equally additive. The technical stuff, like the three I just mentioned, they add about 30 to 60 basis points of value per year.
Oh.
The behavioral stuff, behavioral coaching, emotion management, personality assessment was between 85 and 244 basis points per year. So, when you think about something like behavioral coaching being 8 times as valuable dollars and cents as, as balancing a portfolio, that's incredible. Like, where should we be spending our time? Oh yeah, and what's AI good at, and what is it not good at too, right? I mean, this stuff is going away. And then the final thing is like, why do we get fired? 87% of the time it's for a bad relationship. Only 13% of the time is it for poor performance. And oh yeah, the 13% of people that would fire you for poor performance kind of stink to work with anyways. So, I mean, it's what clients are looking for. It's what benefits clients. It's why clients give referrals, and it's why you get retained. And yet people are still nervous about it because it feels off label. Yeah. It feels off label, but I'll tell you, at Orion, we have a tool for measuring wealth in like this same multi-part way that I just talked about. And it takes 2 minutes, right? And so it's like, look, we're just going to check in on your wellness. We're just going to check in on your wellness holistically. And I think it's an easy conversation to say, money touches every part of our lives, right? There is no way to have a conversation about money without having a conversation about health, relationships, and everything else. And I think we just have to say that to our clients in a discovery meeting. Say, hey, look, we're going to get into a little bit of personal stuff here, not in any sort of voyeuristic way, but simply because money touches every part of our lives. And I promise you, this is what people are asking for. This is what helps people, and this is what gets you referred.
But this is a huge paradigm shift for advisors, right? So all of the things that they've been studying, all of the things that they've been hanging their hats on, right? My amazing financial planning process and my rebalancing and all of the, again, the products and services and all of those sorts of things. And a lot of people who are drawn to this industry are drawn to the industry because of pie charts and bar graphs. Man, you're telling them that, hey, look, and I'm not putting words in your mouth necessarily, but that's table stakes. This is actually what's of great value. And I know Orion has that tool, and I'm sure that we'll have links in places for people to go find out more about how they can utilize that. But let's do brass. If an advisor wants to implement this, where do they go today to get the education, which in turn will give them the confidence in order to really initiate these conversations?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, not everyone needs to do this. Like this is sort of an unpopular opinion, but if your dream in life, if you're a CFA whose greatest joy in life is constructing the most beautifully crafted alts portfolio that the world has ever seen, like that's fine. There's a role for you in an RIA somewhere doing that. So that's like maybe an unpopular opinion, but I don't think this is for everyone, right? And I mean, certainly you can teach these skills, but there's a degree to which they're going to be more or less comfortable for different people. So first of all, are you in that, 10-20% of people who really just needs to be doing primarily technical work,
Yeah.
right? The second thing I would say, assuming you're in that remaining group, you have to start with yourself.
Oh.
Jason Zweig has this great article where he talks about how we typically use behavioral finance as a mirror onto a window onto others' behavior, but it's better used as a mirror onto our own behavior. And you know as well as I do, as someone who used to be in the trenches with clients, they can tell when you've done the work and when you haven't.
Totally. Absolutely.
Like you really can only take your clients as far as you have taken yourself. And clients' number one fear of working with a financial professional is judgment and derision. And when you've done your own work and you've seen how profoundly screwed up and goofy your own attitudes around money are, the derision and the judgment fall away, and you begin to be a new creature. Like you begin to be someone that's wholly different to work with. Now, so that would be, that's step one. Am I, do I want to do this work? Step two, I need to do my own work. And then step three, I would say go seek out a formal training program, right?
Okay.
There's lots of great ones. We at Orion have 50 different courses that are all free on our Orion Advisor Academy. Many of them are behaviorally focused. And so, yeah, free CE, but there's lots of great ones. There's lots of great ones out there. And so, yeah, I think you got to prepare the soil first, though, by doing your own work. And in the book, I there's a chapter where I talk about the power of just working on yourself. And we talk about how people who are in shape make more money. People who go to therapy make more money. Like even compared to people with similar educational backgrounds, people who go to therapy make dramatically more money. It's like 10 or 11% more than people who don't. Uh, this isn't a high class problem. Like this is solid practical advice, even though maybe it feels a little woo.
Well, I don't think this is I think this is the future. And if the future has a little bit of woo, then listen, you're either going to get on board with it or you're not. And in my experience and having so many wonderful discussions with you just hanging out, um, you're going to be left behind, right? Because again, this is what research is showing, that this is why it's so cool. You really balance something I've always respected about you. You balance the hardcore research component of how your brain works, and then you show the practical aspects of what this research is really telling us, and then also giving them actionable items, which I think, the Soul of Wealth just the book for people to go ahead and find out more about how they can plug into this. As we wrap up, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is, so we've talked about the advisor side of this. Let's talk about the client side of this. So yes, we have those three phases, right? You have to, figure out if this is who you want to do, that what do you want to do, then you have to do the work, right? And then you have to go for training. Now let's talk about the client component of this. How do we know? Are there any signals that you have found in your research that will say, oh my God, this is a client who wants to have this real relationship with me? Or is it honestly what 90% of people really are looking for? Because you talk about the basis points component, but I wonder if there's some research behind how many clients who are in retirement or approaching retirement really want to have this conversation.
So it's interesting because when you look at Morningstar has done some interesting research on this, and they ask people what they value in their advisory relationships, and the very last, the least endorsed response is the behavioral finance one. It's like, helps me stay out of my own way and keeps me from making stupid decisions. Kind of, I forget. if anyone from Morningstar is listening, I'm sorry what I did to your research. But so it's interesting to think that the place where they derive the most benefit is in some ways the thing that is least valued. But there's actually a reason that makes sense, right? I mean, there's a reason that makes sense because no one moves through the world thinking of themselves as helpless and broken and prone to gaffes and financially stupid. Even though that's sort of true of all of us to a greater or lesser extent, that's not sort of our self-concept. But if you look at the things that they value most, it's like helps me articulate and reach my goals, like listens to me. Well, that's behavioral finance too. So I analogize this to how I used to. My kids are too old for these shenanigans now, but when they were little, I used to like hide vegetables in their food. It's like you bake some beans into the brownies. Like you hide cover the broccoli with cheese or whatever you need to do. And I feel like that's what we have to do here sometimes. There are certain firms who take an overtly psychological approach, and weirdly, I don't love that. Because it's like, look, here comes some medicine. Look, everyone needs this. People are not asking for this. But when people have experienced someone who listens deeply, when they've experienced someone who goes beyond just the sort of surfacey answer you give about your goals and ambitions, when they experience what I think is this true behavioral finance next generation, it feels different and they want it. So I don't think we need to begin our discovery meetings with lectures about bias and be talking to people about how fallible and broken they are. I think we need to incorporate deep empathy, deep respect, having done our own work into the process. And I think that is a process that feels different. That is a process that's referable. And I think we need to kind of embed behavioral finance into the fabric of what we're doing and not just make this great sort of obvious show of it.
All right, brother. Well, if first off, where can people go get a copy of the book?
Go put some money in Jeff Bezos' pocket at Amazon.com. That guy, hopefully he can catch a break if you buy a copy of The Soul of Wealth. No, anywhere fine books are sold.
Yeah. Well, listen, brother, I want to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to read it. It really is there. I don't think there has been a book like this in financial services. I'm so glad that you gave yourself the gift of writing this, and you then gave that gift to all of our listeners. And if people want to know more about the behavioral tools at Orion, where do they go there?
Yeah, you can follow me at Dr. Daniel Crosby on LinkedIn. I'm always sharing about it there. But if you go to orion.com/BFI, BEFI, that will get you there. Or the Orion Advisor Academy is our CE arm. Free courses on behavioral finance, whether or not you're a client of ours. So go get some free stuff.
And of course, everybody will make sure that we have links. But BFI, that's the keyword that you need to remember. If you go ahead and Google that with Dr. Crosby's name, all sorts of good stuff will happen. Well, Doc, man, it's always a pleasure. I can't wait to see you at another conference. But thanks for being on the show, man.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, everybody, listen, part of education is a huge component of what we do at ProudMouth too. Now we don't have CE academies, but we have a marketing academy, right? It's called the ProudMouth Influence PodRocket Academy. So listen, go to the PodRocket Academy if you want to know how to do compliant marketing and maybe infuse some of these behavioral ideas into your communication so that it does fundamentally show how different you are than the advisor down the street. You can do it at podrocketacademy.com. So for Dr. Crosby and all of us here at ProudMouth, this is Matt Halloran. We'll see you on the other side of the mic very soon.